In a world where loyalty is often taken for granted, my trust was shattered into pieces. The discovery of my wife's affair with her boss broke my heart in every possible way. Of course, I didn't just sit back. My revenge against her was not just verbal, but also physical. But then, something curious happened that changed the game. This is my story, straightforward and true. Enjoy watching it. Dad, it's Mom. Pete grinned as he accepted the phone from his daughter. He had a fair idea what the talk would be about, but it was his first with his wife that morning, so he was looking forward to it. He overheard his wife, John, ask, "Hey, baby, can my sweet teddy bear supervise a dozen teenagers today? I'd like to believe I can handle this. Eva and the girls have been planning this for several weeks, so all I have to do is follow their directions. She and her friends are 19 or 20, so I'm not attempting to manage a group of toddlers." She asked. "Did you put up the pool the way she wanted it?" He responded. Yes. There are chairs in the lounge, in the pub, at the grill. The food is prepared. I did it all while you were gone. Next year, you'll be a chaperone. Don't tell me you weren't looking forward to this. There will be a dozen teenagers in bikinis all afternoon. I'm willing to wager that when I get home, you'll be ready for me. Don't forget, one of them is our daughter. 2 more of them are like surrogate daughters. I don't need to be surrounded by a dozen bikini-clad teenagers to be prepared for you. I'm always ready for you every day. I am sure you are. And I like it." He asked, "Have you had a good trip?" She responded, "We did. It was a worthwhile learning meeting." Joan worked for a mid-size financial firm in a Nashville suburb. She was a senior investment advisor who had been there for about 6 years. "That's wonderful, honey. Have a safe return trip from San Jose. Thanks. I will meet you later this afternoon. Love you, Joan." "I love you, Pete." Eva rolled her eyes at her father, though. She was glad her parents still loved one another as much as they did. She aspired to be as in love with her hubby after 25 years of marriage. Pete was lost in his own thoughts for a moment, thinking about Teddy Bear. He had been a lover till the children were born. Then he was daddy till their oldest child left for college. He has been her teddy bear ever then. He didn't mind it too much. She enjoyed snuggling close to him and told him she liked sleeping with him. Next to her was Teddy Bear. So, who could he complain to? He, his daughter, and her 2 best friends had spent the last few days preparing for the party. It was only 2 weeks till she and her friends began college classes. Most of them wanted a large celebration during their junior year before driving off to other parts of the Southeast. She was beginning her junior year of medicine at Vanderbilt University, roughly 20 miles north of her parents' home in Franklin, Tennessee. She lived with her longtime best pals in an on-campus apartment. She was a really lovely girl who, like her mother, stood approximately 5'6" and was curvaceous. Lily and Carrie, the aforementioned best friends, stayed the night and had been assisting that morning. Lily was also a tall, thin, and handsome African-American with light pecan brown skin and beautifully long curled hair. At 5'10", she was a full inch taller than Pete, which she ruthlessly tormented. He did not mind. He adored her and loved having her around. She was like a sister to Eva, and a second daughter to him. She and his daughter had been inseparable since 3rd grade. She was on a track and field scholarship at Vanderbilt, which covered a portion of her tuition. She ran the 800M, 100M, and mile. When she was younger, she used to run with Pete. However, when she grew older, he informed her that he could no longer run with her since he was holding her back. She missed running with him. She was a bright young lady who was majoring in math and computer science. Carrie Eve, his other best friend, was the first person she ever met on her first day of elementary school. Carrie had dropped her lunch, which their housekeeper had prepared for her, and even given her half of it, because her parents had always encouraged her to serve others. When Lily arrived, they formed their own version of the 3 Musketeers, as they were almost inseparable. Carrie only received a 1300 on her SATs, but she was able to attend Vanderbilt thanks to her parents' money and previous connections. They joked her that she could have gotten a 600 and still been admitted as a prank in high school, rather than being voted most likely to succeed or receiving some other meaningless award. She was chosen the most likely to purchase an island. She was a little blondelle with a cute body on her little 5'2" frame. They were a good group, much like 3 sisters. Pete enjoyed having the 3 of them there with him. An outdoor kitchen adjacent to the side of the two-story pool house is located underneath the backyard pavilion. Pete built almost everything himself throughout the years. They had the table ready to serve lunch, and the rest of their companions were expected to arrive shortly. It was a lovely August day, and the lounge chairs were set up. The pool was pristine, and Pete had mowed and trimmed the lawn. Eva appeared to have inherited her mother's organizational and event planning skills, and she had kept her father busy for the past 2 days. She was his little child, and she gushed about him whenever she had the chance. He was more embarrassed than boastful, and he was confident in his abilities, but not to brag about them. She figured developing and maintaining his modest consulting firm would suffice for some men. She was unconcerned about what other men did. She knew the fathers of the bulk of the girls who came over, and if they had to vote on who had the finest dad, hers would most certainly receive the majority of first-place votes. After assisting to serve a beautiful spread of food and non-alcoholic beverages, Pete said, "Okay, ladies, I am going back inside." "Let me know if you require anything," Lily asked. "Are you certain you don't want to stay out here and eat with us?" "Thank you, Lily. This is for everyone to enjoy." "I'm good." This afternoon was solely for the girls. He'd kept himself busy in his office, from where he could see the pavilion and a section of the pool. When the girls began removing their cover-ups and garments to display their swimwear, he retreated to the den to watch the Braves lose another game so he wouldn't appear creepy. He'd been watching for approximately 20 minutes when he heard a ruckus outside by the pool and went to investigate. He noticed a muscular young man holding Carrie's wrist and attempting to pull her away from her companions, who had surrounded them and yelled for him to stop. Pete dashed outside and approached the group, yelling, "Hey, a-hole, let her go!" The enormous guy, perhaps 6'3", saw Pete and smirked, not bothering to slow down as he pulled a protesting Carrie to the exit. Little Carrie didn't even weigh pound 115, and he was about twice her size. As Pete got near, a hole forced Lily out of the way and she stumbled. Pete tried to catch her, but her tall figure collided with his nose and heart for a split second. He saw stars, and then recovered, and he dashed to be between Carrie, the intruder, and the gate going into the driveway. "Let me go!" Ricky shouted. "Carrie and girls, get back!" All of the other girls stepped away from the 3 people involved in the altercation, but only a short distance. Some people had their phones out filming. I said, "Let her go." Pete said, "A hole." Pete came in close to Ricky, who thought that having 6 inches and 60 pounds or 70 pounds on Pete meant he didn't have to worry about him because his right hand was gripping Carrie's wrist. He attempted to throw a left jab at Pete. That was his first error. Pete dodged low and, with momentum behind him, delivered a good punch to Ricky's solar plexus. A large flood of breath burst out of his mouth, and he leaned back, taking the impact and quickly releasing Carrie. Pete applied a strong knee to Ricky's knots, forcing him to his hands and knees. "Get out of my backyard! A hole!" Ricky cautiously rose to his feet and stated, "You're not as big as my old man said you were. I'm going to enjoy slamming you around." The large guy prepared to take another punch at Pete. However, it was telegraphed so far in advance that Pete had to wait before responding. It was evident that this individual had no training. Thankfully, Pete dove under the large roundhouse right hook. He pushed his right foot behind a hole's right leg as hard as he could. Ricky was already off balance from the botched swing, so he went backwards over Pete's knee, landing hard on his back. Pete responded, "Just leave. I don't want to hurt you." Several of the young females laughed as the shorter man threatened the outmatched giant. Ricky's giggles didn't help as he climbed, and he was dismissed. "You move quite well for a teddy bear, although my dad refers to you as a small teddy bear." Pete wondered where he acquired his information. How would he know about Ricky? They came for him again, but Pete was growing irritated. He realized he needed it before he lost his anger. And he has self-control. Ricky attempted to mimic a right jab, but performed miserably when throwing a left punch. Pete avoided it. Pete was waiting for what would happen next. Another right hook that appeared to originate in Birmingham and slowly zipped by Pete's head as Ricky's arm passed over Pete's head. He moved in and delivered a deadly combo to a hole on his right side, which houses his kidneys and liver. Pete felt that was the hardest he'd ever hit someone with his hands. Ricky fell like a stone. It took him 45 seconds merely to get on his hands and knees. Nobody was laughing anymore as he forced himself onto his knees and prepared to stand. Pete grasped one of the holes, bend his hands behind his back, and apply enough pressure to his fingers that they nearly shatter once he is on his feet. Pete led Ricky through the still-open gate and shoved him out into the driveway. After Pete let him go, Ricky moved like an old crippled man with his side supported. Ricky had had enough battling, but he wasn't finished talking. "You may call your wife darling, but my father refers to her as his sweet kitten." Surprised? Just because she says she's traveling doesn't imply she actually is. They occasionally stay in town so she can enjoy his large tool uninterrupted for a few days near home. Pete said, "You're correct. If you want to continue talking trash about my wife, we can go back into the backyard, continue yapping a hole. Anyway, I would not believe you, even if you claimed you had proof. Now that you've been embarrassed, all you have are falsehoods. We'll see about that. I'll believe it once I see it in my hands." Pete gestured to his hand. "Even then, it's likely that someone will fake it." Ricky only smirked as Pete looked around. Ricky discovered Carrie's Mercedes and hit the hood of her SUV hard enough with his fist to deny it. Pete finally noticed the sounds of the other girls yelling and gesturing at the young man. He had been so absorbed a few moments before that he didn't notice them. Ricky slumped into his BMW and walked away. Pete turned around to see many young ladies making very unladylike gestures toward Ricky while photographing the events on their cell phones. Pete announced, "Come on, ladies, the show is over. Back inside, please do not share that video with anyone yet. Let's discuss it for a few minutes first." "Okay," he heard Eva exclaim, "Daddy, your nose is bleeding." In the next moment, Lily was yelling commands at everyone to make place for Pete on a chaise lounge chair under one of the umbrellas. "Eva, go find him a clean clothing. Carrie, grab him a bag of ice." She got him to sit down and started ripping his shirt off to press against his nose. The remaining 11 girls all had a good look at this. A really fit and lean man in his late 40s. They had never expected what they had just witnessed. Pete had about a dozen bikini-clad nurses who were eager to assist him, but with Lily in charge, that seemed doubtful. One of them dashed into the pavilion to grab him something to drink. Another attempted to ease him back so he could lie down. The rest were chatting about what had transpired while glancing at Pete. When Carrie and Evil returned, he placed the ice on his nose and inquired, "Who the hell was that?" A hole. Who would raise such a piece of shit? "Carrie, what did he want from you?" Eva came in to respond to the first to let a hole. "Ricky Farmington, as you like to call him, is the son of Andrew Farmington, Mom's boss." Shit. Those initial claims simply shifted from some stupid kid talking garbage to possibly a stupid kid who knows something. Shit. He didn't want his concern to be known, even to the others. Carrie explained that he was chasing me because we went out just a few weeks ago, and when he asked me out again, I declined. I tried to be pleasant, but he was not very nice about it. I'm sorry he came here. I'm not sure how he found me, but I believe one of the crew posted about today's party on social media. She implored with her pals to halt what they were doing. Looking back at Pete, she questioned Mr. Clark. "How did your nose begin bleeding?" "Has he never touched you?" Pete stated. "I believe that was from when I attempted to apprehend my other daughter, Lily. She bumped into me on the side of her head. It hit my nose." He grinned at Lily. "I'm so sorry, Dad." Lily had been calling him Dad for many years. "When he pushed me, you were so close, and as you tried to catch me, we were entangled. I did not mean to bump your nose." Pete gripped her hand. "Do not worry. It was not your fault. It does not feel broken." I just noticed Lily was glad to hear that. Pete expressed concern over the videos. "I realize this is a lot to ask of you guys, but please do not share a video of what transpired with anyone outside of this group. No social media posts, emails, or text messages to your buddies. Nothing. Please." "Why, Daddy? You did nothing wrong." "You could have seriously injured him if you wanted to," Eva inquired. He responded in the first place. "I do not want any smears against your mother to be spread. We know they're not true, but they still don't sound right. Also, someone with that type of rage would try to retaliate against Carrie, me, or any of us if that video went viral. Don't you see? Would he be embarrassed and seek retribution? He still might. But I'd hate for one of you to be leaving a movie theater or a college class late at night and have him sneak up behind you and attack you because he's furious, foolish, or intoxicated. Sure, he'd be jailed eventually, but with his temper, he may be deadly and cause lasting damage, Eva asked. Will you call the police? I'm afraid so. We don't need to determine whether to bring charges right now. But he assaulted Carrie and Lily and attempted to harm me. A few girls laughed at Ricky's effort to assault the smaller man. He also damaged the hood of Carrie's SUV and trespassed. I am sure there are other things. I'll have someone come out and take our statements. It should not take long. I apologize, but we have to do this. Can you still have your pool party? He asked. Carrie, is your wrist okay? Yes, I think so. He held it firmly so it could bruise, but nothing else. Pete nodded. Carrie questioned Mr. C. Where did you learn to accomplish this? Ricky is a huge guy in good form. I know he has won a few battles. It's quite dull. Are you sure you want to hear this? A dozen bikini-clad women were shaking their heads up and down. Not a bad sight to see. Pete shrugged. When I was in high school, I was periodically mocked for my height. My parents are both short, so I knew this was unlikely to change. I was always in fantastic shape because I did track in junior high and then cross-country in high school. I was also really good, competing in the state finals. But one night while I was a junior, I went on a date with a nice girl. And when we were leaving the movie theater, a couple of enormous a-holes like Ricky attempted to bother us. They did for a minute, but I attempted to ignore them and pushed my way forward. Being on a date, I didn't want to initiate anything, so I let them push me a little. Fortunately, a couple of my pals were also present. They saw what was going on and joined us, leaving only 2 holes. We ended our date, and I headed home. I was quite angry. I informed my father about it, and the next day he helped me find a martial arts studio near their Knoxville home. He advised me, be the best you can be, but if you ever get good, don't look for trouble. I vowed to defend you and others exclusively, and I took 2 lessons every week until I started college at Georgia Tech. While attending college in Atlanta, I discovered a studio that taught a variety of disciplines, including silent, a close combat style, as well as judo and jiu-jitsu. They did not follow a specific style because their primary focus was self-defense. I trained there for 4 years of college. The instructor was a very old man about my height, and his daughter was about IV, his size, in her late 30s. He commanded the school alongside his daughter, who was the most incredible warrior I'd ever seen. Fast, fearless, and deadly. I watched her spar against large, swift black belts, and they hardly touched her. They typically wish they hadn't. I knew I wanted to learn from her, so for 4 years I took 2 or 4 lessons per week. I was doing well for a while. He was modest when I married John. We still lived in Atlanta, but I reduced my lessons to 1 per week. She has never seen me in a match during our entire marriage. She knows I practice in our basement gym, but that's all. Iva, when you entered college a few years ago, I discovered a nearby studio and resumed studying. I am not as good as I once was, but I still do. Okay, Iva replied. Daddy, I never realized you didn't have to, darling P. Do you remember when we took you and Donnie to Paris? When was he in 9th grade and you in 7th? She nodded. Do you remember the time we drove out to that Moroccan restaurant in the shadowy part of town? She nodded again. I told your mother I didn't want to go there because I didn't think it was a secure place to be at night. Of course, she disagreed. The conversation became heated after a time, but I eventually succumbed, as I usually do. It was an excellent restaurant. I enjoyed it. Do you remember what happened on the way back to the car? Iva responded to the 2 males. A tall and short one approached us from behind and yelled at us to stop. You gave Mom the keys and directed her to escort us to the car and start honking once we got inside. That's correct. While the 3 of you escaped, I was preparing to stop or slow them down if I wasn't there immediately. I knew she'd contact the cops, but I was curious how long it would have taken for them to arrive in that part of town after you departed. The tall one took out a knife and said, Money. I doubt he spoke much English beyond that. I raised my hands as if I didn't want any difficulty, but ultimately he got close enough that I had to confront him. I kept him between myself and the short guy. I instantly stole his knife from him and inserted it into the side of his knee. I'm amazed you didn't hear the scream you let out as the short guy pulled his own knife. I struck him, and his knife dropped away from us, while the tall guy's screaming piqued the interest of several of their pals who began running towards us. At this point, I started racing towards the car, hoping you were inside. I felt in control with the first 2 people, but there were 6 or 7 more headed my way. I decided caution was the greater part of valor, so it was time for me to depart. When I heard the horn, I dashed towards the car. Your mother had pulled onto the street, ready to depart. I got into the front seat and instructed her to punch it. Since we've been married, that was the only other time I had encountered anything like that until today. That was a tiny falsehood. What he didn't tell them was that after Donnie and Eve were born, shortly before they relocated to Nashville, he and Joan went dancing one night while still living in Atlanta. Bobby Taylor, her former college boyfriend and Atlanta Falcons football player, contacted them. Joan seemed unconcerned, but Pete was furious when he asked Joan to dance, and she agreed. They just danced for a few minutes, but when Pete noticed him go into the restroom, he followed. The jock, a wide receiver at Ricky's height, sneered at Pete and began talking about how much he missed Joan, and perhaps they'd dance a little more that evening. Pete wasn't in the mood because the old flame was going to push him out of the way to exit the lavatory. Pete slammed him to the floor. The huge guy fell at an unexpected angle, landed on his arm, and shattered his collarbone at the elbow, thereby ending his season. The Falcons brought in a substitute who performed so well that Bobby was eventually traded to another team. There were no charges filed. Pete proceeded with his companions. So, please, don't send that footage to anyone before the end of the day. There should only be 13 copies, including myself, and never more. They all promised Pete not to send it to anyone. He hoped they intended it. I realize this dampens the mood, but don't let it. He's in a hole. Forget him, Lily said. You mean he is in a hole? Pete grinned, and several of the girls giggled. He stood up and went inside to contact the cops. When the police came, he was greeted by all those attractive women in their swimwear. They hastily covered up, and he asked them to describe what had transpired. He checked Carrie's wrist, which was still red but not seriously wounded. Pete's nose had stopped bleeding, thus he had transformed. Carrie's mother had come over because her father had not yet returned from a trip. The entire discussion only lasted 30 to 40 minutes. The celebration resumed once the police car drew away. Carrie hugged her mother and watched as she drove away. Eva also approached Pete and asked, Dad, do you mind if we stay here until we go to Carrie's? We planned to go dancing after supper, but after this afternoon we'd rather dance here tonight. It's your home, Eva. You know I do not mind. I adore having you here. She hugged her father and rejoined her friends. Pete caught the final inning of the Braves game. They were obviously losing while we were watching. He got an SMS from Joan. The plane was delayed. We will be home late. He exhaled. That small seed of doubt was beginning to trouble him, and he despised how some of Ricky's statements hit so close to home. He needed his wife to come home so that they could discuss. Pete danced with some more of his friends, or, more accurately, they were dancing beside him. They attempted to teach him the electric slide again, but he never quite got it right, which amused everyone, including Pete. Around 10 p.m., they needed to travel to Carrie's house, which had a lot of bedrooms. Pete had really sweet hugs, kisses, and thank yous from all the young girls as they went after a little assistance. It did not take long to tidy up outside. He heard the garage door open as he was emptying the garbage cans. Joan was home. He stepped out to assist her with her bag, and she gave him a warm hug and a short kiss on the lips as he approached. She said, I miss you, baby. How was the party? It was intriguing. I'll explain that in a minute. They had just left to go to Carrie's for the night. I assumed they were going out dancing, he added. They chose to dance here, I'm sure you noticed that. Have you turned off the lights and watched them from inside? That upset him slightly, but he responded, No. Lily took me outside with her, and I danced with the majority of them before they left. If I weren't so exhausted after the cross-country journey and delays, I'm sure you'd be in a great mood right now. I would be delighted to take care of you. Pete wasn't in the mood either. He said, Let me get your bag inside and pour you a glass of wine. I have quite a story to tell you. She was intrigued by what had transpired and followed him inside when he returned to the living room. She sipped her wine and watched him sit across from her rather than beside her. She snickered, assuming this was serious. Pete went on to detail what transpired, including phoning the police, but omitted Ricky's dialogue. She was stunned that someone could just barge into their property and harm innocent Carrie. Pete then revealed the identity of the assailant. His name is Ricky. Ricky Farmington. Andrew's nickname is Ricky. Joan's expression was one of shock and amazement. No way. I can't believe he'd do that. There must be an error. Pete stated explicitly that Andrew forgot to teach him a few things. Then he pondered about things like politeness, respect, how to fight, and when to close his massive trap. Joan paused for a second. Wait a minute. Rick is big? Do you mean you took him out of the backyard like trash? She let out a little giggle. She giggled some more, and then she began giggling. What? She said. You are making this up, correct? My hubby, all 165 pounds of you smashed that tank. He appears to be around twice your size. Okay, what is the joke? Pete wasn't as amused. She saw his dejected expression and urged, Come on, Pete, I'm not trying to hurt your feelings, but be realistic. Pete stood and said, Good night, Joan. Do not pout, sweetheart. I do not mean that negatively. How else could he handle it? I'll be there once I finish this glass. She was astounded when he responded, Do not bother, Joan yelled out to him as she went into the kitchen to place her glass in the sink, but he did not respond. When she went upstairs to their bedroom, he was not there. He was in the guest room. She asked Pete, What are you doing in here? I missed you and was going to snuggle with my teddy bear tonight. Teddy bear? He was now curious as to why she was using that pet name. Was it a term of fondness or derision? He could explode over her usage of the term right now, but he was emotionally fatigued and needed a clear mind to consider things through in the morning. He answered, Well, I suppose we'll both be disappointed. Then he closed and locked the door. After a few minutes of pounding and pleading, she eventually left and walked to their bedroom, perplexed by the change of events. Her husband seems to be losing his head. She thought of texting her daughter to find out more. But it was late. She'd see her in the morning. Besides, her spouse couldn't possibly accomplish what he stated. It was not doable. Pete figured she'd sleep late the next morning after a long travel and a few days on West Coast time. He wondered if she had gone on a trip, which upset him because he was now questioning everything. He sneaked into their bedroom and fetched some jogging clothing, after which he changed and ate a small breakfast. When he heard her start to move, he went for a long run, covering 7 miles in just under. 53 minutes later, he returned. Joan didn't look happy when he walked in. Mister, we need to chat. I don't think you told me the entire thing last night. He ignored her and went into the shower. She followed, but once inside the bathroom, he locked the door behind him. She pounded on the door, but he continued with his shower and shave. Once dressed and refreshed, he prepared to confront his wife. He went downstairs to enter his home office. She was already waiting for him. Andrew called me this morning. I'm not sure I understood the entire story last night. Ricky had blood in his urine and had to go to the ER late yesterday. It couldn't happen to a nicer guy, she said. Ricky told Andrew that he was just talking to Carrie when you suddenly appeared behind him and whacked him in the back with something. They suspect you bruised a kidney. Andrew wishes to pursue charges. Pete responded, Why am I not surprised that the little a-hole lies about the incident? He's probably humiliated that your tiny teddy bear threw him out like rubbish, as you said. Andrew is quite angry. Why did you do that? Why did you attack him? I attacked the unfortunate boy because he was attacking Carrie. You know, the Carrie we've loved, as if she were our own daughter for more than a decade. We took Carrie, Eva, and Lily to Spain for 2 weeks to celebrate Ava and their high school graduations. That same Carrie was being dragged out of our backyard by that disrespectful piece of shit, and I stopped it. Are you suggesting you believe their tale, but not your husband's? Do you think I sucker punched him? Joan stated. I apologize, Pete. No way. Could you do it face to face? Pete wanted to throw something in her face. How the hell could that foolish kid know what he knew? Pete was furious that he had to let that slide for the time being because all he had was Ricky's hearsay and insufficient evidence to accuse her of anything without her easily evading the accusation. And, if true, she will be more cautious in the future. The entire scenario stunk. But if the accusations were true, they were done. So you don't think I could do it face to face? Man to man. No offense, honey. I love you like no one else. But he's massive, enduring, amazing shape. But you're no match for him. Remember Paris? You were sprinting as fast as you could with that small guy chasing you, trying to get to the car before he caught you. That was after I dealt with the large guy. He was not going to capture me, and I was sprinting because Pete stopped. It was pointless. It was immediately evident what she thought of him. Regaling is a hard-fought and successful battle. Battles wouldn't be effective. He could see it was already a lost cause, maybe in more ways than one, she added. Do you have any concept how tough this will make my life? That surprised Pete. Excuse me. What was I supposed to do? Would you prefer to have used a gun? I'd like to know what. You hit him with my hands, he responded. Bullshit. I've seen you work out in our basement gym. You make a strong effort to get the bag. But I don't understand how you could have wounded Ricky by simply hitting him. How could you have gotten a clean shot without sneaking up on him? Thanks for your faith, sweetie. It boosts your confidence. In case you didn't pick up on it, that was sarcasm. Exaggeratedly. She rolled her eyes and moaned. Come on, that is not helping. What do I tell Andrew? You tell him that he raised his piece of shit son to be an asshole, seems like him. And Ricky needs to apologize to both Carrie and me. I won't. Ricky informed him what happened, and it appears you did nothing wrong. Pete shook his head. You must be insane to believe him over your hubby. Did Andrew give you any drugs while you were traveling? Jones's expression was furious at the insult, and he was going to respond when they heard a vehicle come up and honk its horn. Thank you for the reprieve. They stood to see who was present. It was a large Bentley, and people departed the vehicle. Eva, Lily, Carrie, and her father, Brian. All three of the girls went up and hugged Pete, then Joan. A bit later, Brian stepped up and shook his hand. Pete, I'd like to thank you for watching after Carrie. It means a lot to me that you would do this. She is everything to me. I will be forever thankful. Pete shrugged his shoulders, uncomfortable with the compliment. You know we adore Carrie. No way was I going to let that shit go with her. This wasn't going to happen. You'd have done the same. Brian nodded, and Joan said, Girls, could you please explain what happened? Ricky told his father a different version of events than Pete told me. Eva asked, You're receiving two separate stories, and you don't believe Dad? Well, not quite. That is not what I'm saying. I just prefer to hear it from someone else. I'm not sure how that all sounds. Preposterous. Pete shook his head and walked back inside. He would not remain there long. While the girls narrated the entire scene to Joan, Pete grabbed his laptop and an overnight bag. He was getting away before he said anything that he couldn't take back. He needed time to ponder what he was going to do next. When Pete returned outside, Brian, Carrie, and Lily were gone, leaving Joan dumbfounded. How could her spouse have done this? When he saw the shock on his wife's face, he realized how far he had fallen, especially given her attention on how this affected her and her profession. Not him, his daughter, or Carrie. It spoke volumes. Pete inquired, So what are we going to do about that? A hole. Someone needs to educate him proper manners, Joan scoffed. And you believe you're going to be the one to accomplish it? Pete could not believe it. She had just heard 3 individuals support his account, but she still didn't believe he was capable of handling it. A hole. She must believe her husband's some kind of a coward, she said. He's probably pretty furious. Pete smirked, thinking that Ricky was probably still pissing blood. The next thing she uttered killed him. I doubt he'd be as lucky the following time. The expression on Pete's face warned her she had gone too far. She meant it and was simply trying to protect her spouse from harm. How could he confront such a huge, strong young man directly? She watched as his countenance changed from disbelief to wrath. When did you lose all respect for me as a man, Joan? You didn't always treat me like this. You used to have faith in me. I see. That is now gone. You are being silly. My feelings for you have not changed. I'm proud of you and everything we've done together, so call me skeptical. Did you know I have C-level executives from many Fortune 500 businesses on my contacts app? These people contact me at my company when they require assistance. That's how I make a living. My company may not be as successful as Andrew's, but my employees and I are well respected in our sector. Apparently, I receive far more respect than I do at home. These previous couple of days have been incredibly informative when it comes to what you think of me. What does this mean? Not to worry about. I have made a decision. If that piece of shit, either him or his father, isn't here at 6 p.m. tomorrow, to apologize to myself and Carrie. Then Brian and I will contact the police and file charges. He has to pay for the hood of her SUV as well. You can't be serious. I still need to work with Andrew. Perhaps you can persuade him to teach his son good manners and to respect others. Clearly, he hasn't learnt that from his dad. But given how much time you spend with him, I'm sure you're aware of this. Pete, this could jeopardize my employment. So, Joan, see what this is doing to us, but it does not appear that you perceive it this way. Tomorrow at 6 p.m., Brian and I are phoning the cops. I'm going out for a while. No, you're not. We're not finished talking about this. We are completed, and I need to be apart from you. I'm going over to Brian's to discuss this. I am not calling them a holes father, because he listens to you. You can inform him what his child needs to do to avoid jail time. The clock is ticking, Pete. Come back here. He ignored her, walked into the garage, put his bag in his car, and drove away with Joanne, who was standing there with her hands on her hips and an exasperated grimace on her face. Pete had never done anything like this when driving to Brian's. Pete also determined that he needed to do some traveling for his business. What he worried was that based on his wife's reaction and hers and Ricky's statements, she had already succumbed to Andrew. Traveling would take him away from her and give him a chance to observe how connected she was with Andrew. At this point, he believed the foolish kid. Damn you, Joan. Brian and Pete chatted and agreed on 6 p.m. They'd either contact the cops or wait until tomorrow. Pete went to a local hotel and sat at the desk, working while the Braves game played in the background. Around 5 p.m., his phone rang. He had banned John's phone number on the home phone so he could enjoy some solitude. He wondered who it was. Ever. Hello, baby. Hi, Daddy, she said. I'm driving back to the apartment. Are you nearby? At Vanderbilt. Iva shared a college apartment with Carrie and Lily. All Vanderbilt undergraduates are obliged to reside on campus. When campus housing requests appeared to be selected by random tosses of the dice, the 3 undergraduates living together in one of those very good flats was an unusual arrangement. Supposedly, there is an extremely complicated selection process for getting into one of those prized flats. He assumed Brian merely inquired how much he needed to pay to the institution to make it happen. And it occurred. Brian and his wife were born with money, a lot of old-school money. He also did well in entertainment law in Nashville. He hailed from a long line of Williamsons and had made large contributions to the Williamson Medical Center in Franklin, Tennessee, the county seat. Pete is, I'm at the house and there's plenty of room for 13. I will be there in a few minutes. 10 minutes later, he heard a knock at the door. When he opened it, Eva hugged him tightly. I do not understand, Daddy. Why would a man believe us? I'd say she doesn't believe I can defend my family. Eva said she should. I informed her about Paris. Pete shrugged. Let me guess, she did not believe you. Eva shook her head, and he could see a tear leak from her eye. He said, I'm sorry, baby. Maybe great. Big Andrew convinced her that I didn't quite measure up. I do not know. You don't believe what that a-hole said? You for the second time. He wanted to explain that he believed John had lost all respect for him as a man because she was most certainly screwing someone much bigger than him. He wanted to tell his daughter that it appeared that her mother was a 304, but he didn't say that. He denied everything, saying he was just talking garbage. Pete despised lying to his daughter, but he didn't want her to think such things about her mother. They may turn out to be true, and while things did not appear to be going well, this was only supposition at the moment. Do not worry, sweetheart. Everything will be okay. You'll see, she said. I want to believe you, Daddy, yet I am afraid. Do not be. We'll be okay. She wondered if Minner and him were a family. She left a few minutes later. School would restart in a few weeks, and she had her summer internship at the University Medical Center that had a few more days remaining. The next day, he checked his home security app on his phone to see when the garage doors opened and closed, marking when Joan had departed for work. Running your own small consulting firm had the advantage of allowing you to work from home when you weren't traveling. The downside was that you couldn't flee to the office if you were fighting with your wife. Finally, at lunch, he examined his messages. He received 20 texts from his wife, some of which were pretty long. Most of them were about his outrageous behavior. The last one stated you'd gone. He'll arrive at 6. I left you a voicemail after he checked his voicemail. He ignored all of them, which he would eventually delete. But listen to the final one. Pete, Andrew mentioned that Ricky would be there a few minutes before 6 tonight to apologize. I'm still not happy with you for placing me in this situation. We can discuss that after everyone has left. Pete rolled his eyes. It was still his fault. He was scheduled to drive up to Louisville, Kentucky to conduct an operations planning whiteboarding session for one of his clients all day Thursday and Friday morning. He resolved to drive there tonight after the apologies and arrive a few days early. He would cover one hotel night himself and meet with the client in person on Wednesday at 5:45 p.m. Brian and Carrie came. She gave Pete a hearty embrace, and Brian shook his hand, saying, "This should be interesting. Are you and Joan okay? It seemed like this was putting you in a difficult situation. There's nothing to worry about. We will be." She's trying to grasp her brain around her little hubby beating up huge big Ricky, said, "I'll admit that I was astonished by how convincingly you did it, rather than that you did it at all. I suppose I shouldn't have been. You've always seemed well prepared in everything you do." "Thank you, Brian. Hopefully Joan will remember this as well. If you don't mind, we'll wait outside since I don't want that piece of garbage in my home. I wouldn't either." A few minutes before 6 p.m., a red two-door BMW drove into their driveway. Ricky did not look delighted when he got out. Joan still had not arrived. He approached the three of them standing there and said, "Carrie, I apologize for Saturday. I miss you and wanted us to get out again. Was rejected. Was rejected. I know we won't be going out again, but I hope I didn't ruin our friendship. I'm sorry." He appeared sorry, but Pete suspected he was simply searching for an opportunity to get into her trousers someday. Carrie remarked, "I am not sure if we will ever be friends again, Ricky, but I will try to be polite and friendly. That's the best I can do right now. I understand." Ricky turned to face Brian. "Mr. Williamson, I apologize for what I did to Carrie and her son. Just send us the bill and we'll take care of it." The words, "I'm sorry." Whatever he said, he didn't appear to be sorry. Brian merely nodded. When Ricky looked at Pete, the contriteness had vanished. "Mr. Clark, I apologize for disrupting the party and intruding on your property. I shouldn't have done that." "Okay, Ricky, thank you." I suppose we're done here before Ricky turned to walk back to his car. When he reached the car door, he wore a smirk that everyone could see. He looked at Pete and mouthed the word, "kitten." Pete opened his hand and pointed to it like he did on Saturday, indicating that he believed him once he saw the evidence. Ricky grinned and climbed into his car. Brian replied, "Well, his apology to Carrie appeared sincere, but ours did not. What did he say to you before he drove off?" Pete shook his head. "Nothing significant. We had a conversation while he was leaving the other day. He was bringing it up to try to irritate me again. Carrie wanted to say something, but she regretted agreeing to go out with him in the first place." "What a horrible decision," Brian stated. "So, if you need any assistance with him, please let me know. With a single phone call, I can assemble a legal team to represent him and his father. I might even recruit a deputy or two to shadow him over a couple of weekends. That may prove entertaining." He smiled at that thought. "Thank you, Brian. Let's hold off on it for now. I have a few other issues I need to address first." Brian nodded, after dropping off Eva at home yesterday. Carrie notified her parents about Ricky's unpleasant remarks about Joan. They'd known Joan for years. None of them believed he was telling the truth. At least they hoped so. Brian and Pete shook hands. Carrie gave him a final embrace, and they drove away. Pete unlocked the garage and drove away after they departed. Jones's automobile approached as he pulled out of his driveway. Pete did not even try to wave. As he pointed his car north toward Louisville, he would utilize the time to decide what he was going to do about gathering evidence in one way or another. Most importantly, he needed to get away. He was still furious with his wife for the disrespect, and with Ricky's charges on top of that, he knew he'd be unable to refrain from saying something he'd later regret. He would utilize the time apart to calm himself and prepare. 10 minutes later, his phone rang. He debated not responding, but felt there was nothing to lose except the frustration. Maybe he could convince her to leave him alone while he was gone. "Hello, Joan. Pete, I hope you're just going to the grocery and returning right back." "No, my client needed me to arrive in Louisville a few days early. I'll stay till after I have lunch with him on Friday. I should be home in time to have dinner with you after that." Then he decided to do a little digging. "That assumes you will not be traveling with Andrew this weekend." The comment took her by surprise. What? No, I only travel every 6 to 8 weeks. Why are you saying that? It is nothing. If you had been there on Saturday, you would have witnessed the entire event. I'm still a little upset. You've taken Ricky's side. I am sure you are. And I'm sorry, Andrew isn't very happy either, but that is understandable. Did Ricky show up to apologize? Pete stated. He appeared to sincerely apologize to Carrie, but I assume that was because he'd still want to try to have sex with her someday. He apologized to Brian and me, but it was the most phony apology I've ever gotten. You and Andrew should feel relieved that he isn't going to jail. He's only a kid, Pete. He is a 20-year-old man who has to learn to control his anger and respect others. Joan gave an audible sigh. I would like to chat to you about all of this tonight. Can we chat when you arrive home on Friday? Sure, I'll miss you, Pete. Pete thought that she wouldn't have a nice week. Joan. He then hung up the telephone. Joan was astonished by the way he finished their chat. This was upsetting her kind husband, and she still felt he wasn't very aware of how the circumstance affected her career. She thought this would simply be a hiccup in their long journey together. On Friday, she made him a nice meal and intends to offer him a good night's sleep in the bedroom. This would all blow over. It took slightly over 3 hours to get to Louisville. Plenty of time to think about what he needed to do. He was confident that the brat Ricky knew too much for it to be idle chatter. It said little about his father that he would share such information with his son. But if Andrew is the type of man who sleeps with married women, it's not surprising that he's not the best father. The only thing he really suspected was that Joan and Andrew cheated while on vacation. Of course, they may be having sex in town, as Ricky suggested. Andrew was divorced, so they wouldn't need a motel. Damn. However, he suspected Ricky would be seeking for evidence to rub Pete's nose in it. He could try to fake something, but Pete would be on the alert for that. Pete planned to travel as much as he could over the next few weeks. If she cheated when he was out of town, then the two of them might be careless and do it at home. Andrew seemed like just enough of an asshole to want to try it, and Joan appeared to be so loyal to Andrew that she might allow it. Perhaps he should hire a person and have them followed. He sighed, unable to comprehend what had happened. But Joan's contempt for him was surprising. I was curious how long he had been blinded by his love for his wife. He went to Amazon immediately after checking into his hotel. He created a new account and ordered many different hidden Wi-Fi cameras, which he plans to install throughout his home. They would be delivered on Thursday to his hotel. Hopefully, they won't record anything. But he didn't like the odds. It was a long week for everyone. Iva contacted her dad a couple of times, and he told her he was all right. Donnie called once to check on him, and Pete told him the same thing. Everything was fine. Joan left text and voice messages telling him how much she loved and missed him. They were conveniently left while Pete was with his clients. He was glad about that because he didn't want to talk to Joan. On Friday, he drove 3.5 hours home, dreading what awaited him. However, it went better than intended. Joan was dressed properly when he came, with a pretty dress that hit just above her knees. She was wearing high heels and good jewelry, which Pete assumed meant she wanted to go out to dinner. In her heels, she was the same height as him, which never disturbed him. He always enjoyed having her on his arm. That night, he was fine with her going out because it would put her in a good mood and likely avoid any conversation from becoming serious until they got home. He dressed quickly, and she requested him to take them to a swanky steak establishment that she knew he liked, like the evenings when they would attend performances. She spent the entire night on his arm, cheesed off one of her shoes, and stroked his leg beneath the table. He despised the fact that she could have such an effect on him while he was still angry. He pondered how many more evenings like this would come, hoping he was mistaken but knowing his suspicions were correct. When they arrived home, she was all over him the moment they came through the door. They hadn't made it past the family room before she had taken down her dress and thong and was on his zipper. Standing there in her garters and heels had the desired impact on Pete. Joan didn't object when he dragged her up, spun her around, and screwed her while she was lying on the couch. She dragged him up the stairs to the bedroom and did it again. That was fantastic. I needed it. Pete, I love you. He hugged his wife and said, I loved you too, Joan. She forgot the verb tense after lying on him for a few more minutes and going to the restroom to prepare for bed. When she returned to the bedroom, she spooned back into her husband, wrapped his arm around herself, and fell asleep contentedly, certain that everything was fine in the world. The following morning, Joan was already up and painting circles on her husband's chest. Once she could tell he was well and awake, she murmured, "Thank you for last night. It was a good night." He had to admit it was really wonderful. "My pleasure, sweetheart." The words "sweetheart" reminded him of what Ricky had said. Joan continued, "I need to tell you something, but I hope you won't be too upset. I need to travel to Memphis on Thursday to meet with one of our university clients. They want a comprehensive examination of their portfolio. I should be returning on Friday. How did this occur? Aren't these scheduled a little more in advance?" she responded. "Normally they do, but a competitor has been talking to them and they are one of my top clients. So Andrew has asked me to go speak some sense into them." "So you're going alone this time?" "I am. They've been with me a long time, so everything should be fine." He sat silently for a minute, contemplating. She questioned him. "Are you okay?" He replied, "Yeah, I am in a similar situation. I have to travel next weekend and all the following week. General Dynamics, VP of Supply Chain over there, Gulfstream Division, has invited me to a supply chain information technology meeting. I attended a conference with him in Orlando. Then I'll be with them at their Savannah facility, the remainder of the week." She sat up at that realization, allowing herself to become uncovered, which looked wonderful as her jugs were still jiggling once she was sitting, not caring much about anything else anymore. Pete reacted by bringing her closer to him so he could start kissing. Pete had always admired her figure because she was still curvaceous and had large jugs to match. Joan wanted to hear more about his remarkable vacation. Slow morning sex followed by a good shower had become uncommon for them in recent years, and they both relished the opportunity. She resented that they didn't do it more often, but she recognized that it was also her responsibility. Pete despised the idea that everything was about to come to a horrible conclusion. She didn't want to ask during breakfast, but she did anyway. "Pete, we did not talk about last weekend. Are we okay? I hope you understand how much I adore you. We need to find a way out of this because I have long-term ambitions for you and me." He grinned and squeezed her hand. "I would enjoy that as well." Joan, albeit he didn't expect it to happen. He needed to give her credit. She tried all weekend and early the next week to love him, not simply with sex as much as she had in many, many years. He did his best to reciprocate, but he honestly believed the end was near. Over the weekend, he planted a small GPS tracker on her car to determine where she went. He took all of the Amazon shipments that had been hidden in his car's trunk and arranged them. He replaced smoke detectors, books on shelves, and wall receptacles with gadgets that included hidden Wi-Fi cameras and microphones. He expanded his security system by installing a few exterior cameras. His home was now entirely video and soundproof, and instead of being prepared, he felt miserable. Joan kissed him goodbye on Thursday morning, and he inquired if she would drive her car to Memphis or rent one. "I will take mine. Do not worry. The employer will reimburse my mileage, and I will be safer driving my automobile." "Okay. Be careful." "I will, baby. Love you. I adore you, too." It didn't take long to confirm his fears. A few hours later, when she should have been at their Brentwood office or on I-40 heading to Memphis, the GPS in her car showed Andrew's house. His marriage was officially ended. Pete needed to blow off some steam, so he went to his dojo to spar with whoever was present and then work out. He wanted to be sharp because if he ever had the opportunity, he'd make Andrew pay physically. So much for self-defense only. "Thank you again, Joan." Joan did him the courtesy of texting him later that day to let him know she had arrived safely in Memphis. The GPS still showed her vehicle at Andrew's residence. He prepared for his phony trip to Orlando and decided he would phone tomorrow to find a way to tell his wife he didn't need to bother. Early Friday morning, an email was delivered to his company email address with the subject, "Kitty Bear." The message stated, "I found your email on your website. I've been working on my father, and he warned me that before long I'll be banging her too." There was a link to a cloud account that had hours and hours of video from multiple cameras in Andrew's home. It appeared to have been recently set up and was capturing events in real time. He watched the first recorded feed and saw Joan and Andrew enter the house. Andrew started undressing her in the family room, and much like Pete the previous Friday night, Andrew had Joan bent over his couch, screwing her. Pete had seen enough. He drove up to the airport, parked in long-term parking, called his wife, and was routed to voicemail. As expected, he left a voicemail stating, I am at the airport and leaving now. I will text you while I am gone. With the background noise from the airport, it would sound like he was flying out soon. He did not fly anywhere. He went to the airport Marriott to hang out and review some of the evidence he had on his wife. Stupid kid. Pete didn't need or want to see them have sex. One time over the back of the couch was sufficient. Actually, simply seeing her automobile at Andrew's house overnight was enough. He was curious about what they might say, however. It was soul-crushing. Even without watching the film, he had to endure the moaning, groaning, slapping, and slurping. But he ultimately learned numerous important bits of information. First and foremost, Andrew, I understand that you are upset today and tomorrow, but it is not necessary for you to try to regain. I am aware of this. Why would I need to recover something that is already mine? I'm still upset that Ricky had to apologize. You must learn to better handle your tiny husband. I've been restraining myself from him as you requested. She lied. He let out a loud thunderclap. Ask. I not is. You do what I tell you, if you want all of the advantages that come with me. She was getting tired of this controlling and possessive conduct. She was very positive that Andrew was approaching his expiration date. If she wanted to keep her marriage together, she did. I know that I like being with you, but I love Pete. He's a good father and a good husband. I'm not giving him up either. He and I are planning to ride off into the sunset together. Why are you screwing me if you love him so much? She smiled at him. You understand why you miss being with a big man. I understand. It's a baby. No, it's not your big tool, though. I am not complaining. He's an excellent lover. I just don't know. Sometimes I like being with someone who I can still look up to when I'm wearing my heels. I like to wear a man's t-shirt that hangs below my buttocks. I adore placing my hand on your biceps and feeling something more than just lean. When you and I go down the street, I never worry about someone approaching you and initiating a fight, after working with you for so many years. I was reminded that I had missed it from time to time. Don't worry, my sweetheart. You keep taking care of me, and I will continue to take care of you. However, if you are unable to keep him in line, I may need to speak with him. I'm still mad at him for sucker-punching Ricky, she admitted. You will not if you attempt to injure even a single hair on his head. You will regret it. You won't hurt my hubby. Do you hear me? This astonished both Andrew and Pete. Andrew replied, Fine, fine. If he means that much to you, I will not hurt the small man, but don't forget who you belong to. That sentence irritated her because she did not belong anywhere, but if she did, it was for her husband. Also, get him under control. I don't want him to sneak up and smack me in the back. That would not go well for him, she said. I told you that. The females told me you did not do that. I'm not sure how, but he apparently beat him fair and square. Andrew laughed. I'm sure they just confirmed their stories. That little kitty would never be able to beat Ricky. No way. He is not a kitten, but if he is, he's my cat bear. You allowed me to manage him. Andrew laughed. For the time being, I'll be content as long as I get to handle you. She wondered what he meant by, for now. She did not have to wait long. The second fascinating exchange occurred after he left the note at the airport. Pete anticipated what would happen based on Andrew's attitude. Joan stated, Well, he's gone for a week. Andrew's smile was not pretty when he said outstanding. We can now take a couple more days off and continue to screw. Joan responded, Yes. No, if you keep screwing me so hard, you'll bruise me. How will I explain that to him? Well, you weren't supposed to screw him very much, if ever. So how will he see it? He still notices me getting dressed. You told me you like it when I tease him. Andrew smiled at the concept. Well, if we get to have sex for the next week, you should keep him away for a few days. Otherwise, he would notice how exhausted you are, she said. A cool bath and 24 hours generally suffice for me to tighten back up. Besides, he's not much smaller. You. Andrew did not want to hear that. Taking authority, he stated, This is what we will do. I'll be as kind as you want, but not in my house, or while we're traveling. I will screw you whatever I want. If we are at your house, I will be as sweet as your adorable little hubby. You stated he wouldn't return until next Friday night. This concerned Joan. She and Andrew had never had sex at her house before. I'm not convinced that is a good idea. Do you remember what I said yesterday? You do what I say and everything will be good. If it bothers you so much, I won't sleep at your house. We'll just have a few long lunches there. That will appear very harmless. Joan hesitated for a few moments, but eventually joined Pete, Orlando, and Savannah. She should be okay. She would only phone him for a few minutes each morning and night to check on him. Okay. Only long meals. This merely reinforced to her that she needed to leave Andrew. And soon. But how? Andrew's nasty smile emerged as he realized she would have a difficult time getting him out once he was inside the house. Andrew wasn't bothered about Pete arriving early. He could deal with irate spouses, especially ones the size of Pete. He copied all of the videos that were in the cloud folder. Once they had left Andrew's residence, he would destroy the server files, leaving Pete with the sole copies unless Ricky saved them somewhere else. Pete had numerous calls to make. It was Friday afternoon, so he hoped people were still working. His first call was to Brian. "Hey, Brian, this is Pete. Just a moment." "Sure, buddy. I have several. What up? Remember the chat we were having at my house when Ricky arrived to apologize?" "I do," Pete stated. "Ricky's claims appear to be true. Joan has been having an affair. I'm not sure how long this has been going on, but it's been a while. Man, I'm very sorry. I assume this isn't a social call? I'm afraid not. I need a favor. I need an excellent divorce attorney." "Quickly," Brain answered. "Done. I only know the woman. She can be cruel and vicious. Or simply get it over with. Whatever you prefer. Let me give her your information and she will make time for you today. That sounds great. Also, please instruct Miriam not to mention anything to anyone. I know you don't keep secrets from her, so please keep this quiet until I give Joan the documents. Possibly next week." "Sure, Pete. I am sad for both of you. We have always liked you and Joan," Pete stated. "Thank you, Brian. I'm sorry, too. I owe you." "No, you do not. We've been friends for a long time, and so have our girls. This is just me assisting a friend. When all is said and done, you are welcome to buy me a beer or two. I think I'd enjoy that. Consider it finished." Brian put feared family lawyer Charles in touch with Pete, and she started preparing divorce papers that evening. He noticed Joan's automobile had returned to their home, and just as Pete was about to fall asleep, his phone called. Was Joan. "Hello, Peter. How's Orlando doing?" "Hot and humid with a risk of rain, which is quite typical for late August." "How about Memphis?" she replied. "You mean Nashville? I got back this afternoon. It is lonely without you. I wish we had another Friday night, like last Friday night." "Yes, I'd like it too." Pete wishes he could return to a month or so ago when he believed his wife was faithful and have a night like last Friday. However, there was no going back. They talked for a few more minutes before she proclaimed her feelings for him. "Pete, I love you." "Joan, I love you too." He was quite sad when he disconnected the call, but the more he considered it, the angrier he felt. The next day, Saturday, he returned to the airport to hire a car. He needed to go to a dojo and practice some. He couldn't use his car or go to his regular one for fear that someone there knew his wife or children and would reveal his presence in town. He called around and found one near the Opry, away from their home, who would let him come. He spent Saturday and Sunday sparring and working out at their gym. They were terrific workouts, and he felt confident in his present level of skill. He texted Joan, and she texted back. He noticed her car in their house, and the cameras showed that she was there alone on Saturday, but evidently visited her on Sunday. This made him sad. He was about to lose his family. He had not anticipated losing the children. However, with the impending divorce, their family unit would be no more. After a few minutes, his sadness turned into resolute action. He reasoned, "Well, I guess you have to deal with what life gives you," which was exactly what he intended to do. Brian called Pete on Monday morning, which was unexpected. "Pete, I needed to give you a brief call. Joan called Miriam last night. She requested if she might forward her resume to our investment advisors because she felt it was time for a change. Miriam said she'd look into it. What are your thoughts? I understand that this does not excuse the affair, but perhaps she is trying to get away from Pete for a minute." He considered his family, what he intended to do, and how his life was likely to unfold. She would never be his wife again. She would probably have fewer troubles with the kids if she could get away from Andrew. "Yes, go ahead. The harm has already been done, but I believe that will make life easier for everyone." Brian responded, "I understand." By Monday afternoon, Charla had completed the divorce paperwork, and Pete wondered if the encounter at his house would take place soon. Joan called him that night to say she missed and loved him. He attempted to return the adoration. Donnie also called him, and they had a terrific conversation. He felt Eva had some knowledge of what was going on, despite his protestations. But Donnie, unless Eva told him, which she definitely did, everything would catch him off guard. Damn you, Joan. He assumed Pete did not sleep well that night. Pete worked from the hotel on Tuesday morning and was notified at lunchtime by the GPS on Joan's car, which was leaving her office and heading home. They could ride together, although it may seem hazardous. So he assumed they would go their different paths. His home security cameras detected 2 automobiles pulling into his driveway. He prepared to drive home. He was in no hurry. He expected them to take a few hours. Joan mentioned that we should return at 2 p.m. People will begin searching for us. Andrew said, "Do not worry about it. I am the owner of the company. Nobody will question me. True, they will not question you, but they may wonder about me. I don't want anyone telling my husband why you don't believe he will divorce you, do you?" Another indication that Andrew had no real interest in her besides sex? I don't know. I know he would not want to. He might get away with a one-time blunder. But what if he knew how long? I do not believe he would forgive me. Andrew said you have kept him in the dark for 3 years. I believe you can manage. Yes. Okay, maybe I can. If we merely see each other every month or so, as we used to. The previous few weeks have been perilous. I'd like to keep it private so that only we know, which is why I should at least return to the office. Andrew smiled, thinking of Ricky knowing and possibly participating soon. Joan was an excellent employee, but not indispensable. Her future with the firm may be determined by how she acts in the future. He believed he had her in a good place. She couldn't make a scene at work because it would ultimately get back to her husband. The same thing happened to her, perhaps accusing him of sexual harassment. Even if she attempted, the accused possibilities were 1. However, proving it would be incredibly difficult given how long the romance had lasted. As a result, he felt empowered and in charge of the situation. Pete directed Park down the street, out of sight of the home. He'd been there for an hour, listening to their screwing and talk via Wi-Fi cameras that were transmitting any movement and noise to the cloud. He heard the comment around 3 years ago and thought himself a fool instead of getting down. He utilized that as fuel for his fire. He checked his home security system on his phone app to ensure that no alarms were set and that no chimes would sound when he opened the rear door. He sneaked in and softly ascended the stairs. Once on the landing, he heard Joan pleading, "Come on, Andrew, I need to get back to the office." Pete walked into their bedroom and said, "That means get the hell out." Joan was shocked to see her husband standing there. She pulled the covers over herself and shouted, "Peter, I thought you were in Savannah." This is not as it appears. Pete leaned against the doorframe and answered, "Now, Joan, you are normally a fairly intelligent woman, but that has to be the stupidest thing you have ever said." Except for that dipshit. He could see his wife's face and neck turn bright red at that comment. "Good," he said. "At least you feel some embarrassment." Andrew stated, "Oh, well, the tiny decided to come and witness how a full-size man cares for his wife. Do not worry, she claims she only loves you. But we both know she enjoys having sex with me." "Andrew, shut up. That is not true, Pete," she sobbed. Pete said, "I only love you." Apparently not enough to keep away from this big bum. He mentioned something to Andrew. "Well, I seem to recall your foolish baby son on the ground the other day, struggling to stand up after I beat him with my bare hands. Maybe I should go teach him another lesson for messing this 304, or would you like to take? Nonetheless, your finest shot at me was well-deserved." That remark stung Joan. Pete had never mentioned anything about her. The other sentence undoubtedly caught Andrew's attention. "I am going to beat you to death in your own home in front of your tiny wife. She won a bigger and better man than you, and she received one." Yeah. Put your shorts or pants on and meet me in the backyard. I don't want your bum exposed after I call an ambulance to pick you up." As Andrew stood to recover his pants, Pete began laughing at him and pointing to his tool. "Joan, you traded me for that baby carrot, good God. You could say you wanted a taller man, but you certainly weren't interested in him being bigger. Andrew was actually a little bigger, as Joan mentioned, but no man is ever happy when someone makes fun of his tool." Pete wanted Andrew to be angry. Pete left the room without waiting for either of them. Joan was crying even more now, seeing Andrew advance after her husband had gotten her moving. Nonetheless, she had to stop this. She did not want to hurt her husband. She sprang for Andrew, but only managed to scratch the tops of his shoulders and back with her fingernails. Surprised by her actions, Andrew instinctively turned and backhanded her hard, knocking her back against the bed's headboard, injuring and stunting her to the point of near unconsciousness. Pete was already running fast down the steps, and Andrew was lucky not to hear Joan being hit. He didn't want his house wrecked during the imminent conflict because Pete had no intention of concluding the situation fast or leaving his home. Pete used a mouthpiece just in case. Then he dashed into his backyard as if he were being pursued, in full view of his new security camera facing his backyard. Andrew was not far behind him. Andrew stated, "I'm going to enjoy beating on your Pete. After I finish, I'm going to bring Joan here and screw her into one of the chairs by the pool so you can watch." Pete spoke around the speaker saying, "I don't care if you screw her or not. She no longer matters to me. What I'm doing here is teaching you how not to screw married ladies. I anticipate you to learn a terrible lesson in the backyard." Andrew sneered and approached Pete, intending to simply grab him and beat the snot out of him. He expected his better reach to be a big help in the battle. As expected, Andrew shone a little more experience than Ricky by having his hands up in a standard boxing position with his shirt off. Pete could tell Andrew had massive arms and shoulders that matched his size. Clearly, he worked out in the gym, but the flab around his stomach indicated that he spent the most of his time lifting weights and doing minimal cardio. Except for screwing Joan, Pete would have an advantage in a longer fight, and it was suggested that his midsection may be soft. As long as Pete kept his huge, meaty fists from going too close, he should be fine with the security system recording. Pete held his hands up, as if he did not want to fight. When he harmed Andrew, he intended to make it appear as if it was in self-defense. He only intended to share the footage if Andrew attempted to fabricate a story or press charges. Hopefully, nobody will ever see the video. Andrew charged at Pete, delivering numerous jabs and attempting to grasp him. Pete simply stepped backwards to dodge them. Andrew waited for a while, and with Pete's hands raised, Andrew seemed to be the aggressor again. Pete was only waiting for his chance. Andrew would rush to throw punches, and Pete would move out of the way or block them with his arms away from the camera. Pete still appeared to be trying to avoid the much larger assailant. Pete could do this all day if he was cautious, but he could immediately see Andrew was breathing heavily. After a few minutes of this dance, Andrew's massive right-handed haymaker appeared as expected. It looked exactly like Ricky's, but from a superior opponent, like he did against Ricky. He struck Andrew hard in the right kidney when Andrew was bending down in pain. He did not go down. That was no problem for Pete. Since Andrew was not recuperating rapidly, Pete jumped up and descended, delivering a brutal elbow down into the kidney area with a loud bang. Pete hoped the 12th rib was totally floating. Now, after the strike, Andrew did go down, this time on his hands and knees. He didn't try to stand up since he couldn't. His side was on fire. How did that little crap strike him so hard? Pete stood waiting for Andrew to stand as this was being recorded. He needed Andrew to keep appearing to be the aggressor, but this was getting increasingly difficult. Andrew eventually stood and raised his hands as if he planned to box again. Pete could tell he wasn't moving properly. Pete was now loving Andrew, throwing blows despite the fact that his ribs hurt. The jabs were not particularly hard. They almost looked for show. He understood that each punch would be unpleasant, especially for someone who was not used to being hit or in agony. Pete could now return jabs as Andrew moved more slowly, but each jab was directed toward the side that had been hit previously or the kidney area on the opposite side. Andrew's grimaces turned to misery as each strike was delivered. Andrew recognized he wasn't going to win the fight. He thought he could get near enough to the smaller man to assault him, grab him, and throw him to the ground, since he recognized he wasn't fast enough to hit the quick guy. Also, his side was killing him, and he was having difficulty breathing in the bedroom. After regaining her composure, Joan put on a robe and dashed down the stairs leading out of the bedroom. She grabbed her phone and dialed 911, reporting that her husband and her boss were fighting in her backyard and had dispatched an ambulance. She froze as she approached her husband's home office and dashed inside. Andrew tried to rush Pete again, but this time he lumbered and was off balance due to his discomfort. Pete tripped him up, and when Andrew landed on his hands and knees, Pete pretended to be the Titan's kicker. He wound up and fired the crushing shot he had hoped for. Andrew's reaction was to cry out and curl up into a fetal position, his hands protecting his balls. Too late. Andrew would not be able to get up on his own, and it seemed unlikely that he would do so any time soon. "Pity," Pete replied to a whimpering Andrew. "Who's the bear now? A hole. Compared to you, I am a screwing Kodiak. You're lucky I won't drag your rear into the water and drown you." Pete sat down about 10 feet away, listening to Andrew whimper and moan in pain. Normally, he would have been horrified to see somebody so terribly harmed. He felt nothing for this man, save that a small amount of justice had been done. He waited for the police or ambulance to arrive, hoping Joan had contacted them. He was astonished he hadn't noticed her. Where was she? What happens next? Pete was stunned. Joan was running out of the home with the shotgun, her hands and a black eye indicating that she was approaching Andrew and aiming the gun, prompting Pete to jump up and soothe the frantic woman. She yelled, "You won't hurt my husband. I will murder you. Do you hear me? You won't hurt my hubby. There's little likelihood of that happening." Pete embraced her close to him, causing the gun to point down to the ground, and he gently slipped the gun out of her hands and placed it on the ground away from them. Several minutes later, a police officer arrived and approached them. She was still saying, "You will not hurt my husband. You won't hurt my hubby." She appeared to be coming undone. The cop removed the shotgun ammunition before examining the injured victim. Speaking with dispatch, he learned that the ambulance was only a few minutes away. Andrew was coughing up blood by this point, which astonished the officer because his only visible features were his crimson sides. There appeared to be some early bruising and significant scratches on his upper back. He spotted Joan's growing black eye and asked her first man, "Are you okay?" That silenced her grumbling and appeared to rouse her. She responded, He. She then sobbed for a time and pointed at Andrew. "He assaulted me when my husband arrived. Andrew chased him." Pete was confused by the reaction assault. It was totally voluntary. The officer inquired, "Ma'am, please hurry to the hospital so that the abuse can be documented." "Okay. Can my hubby take me?" "Sure. But you need to go as soon as possible. Right now would be preferable." The officer said, "I'll stay here by the attacker until the ambulance arrives." He looked Pete up and down and replied, "You appear unharmed. Let me guess, you are black or something." Pete shook his head and continued, "Or something. I know how to defend myself and my family, but I can assure you that I am far more dangerous than you can possibly imagine." The police nodded, and Joan sobbed on her husband's shoulder, knowing Andrew hadn't wounded him. She was the one who had hurt him. He took Joan inside to get dressed for the hospital. She asked if he'd come with her to assist her change, but he said no. You didn't want to accompany her upstairs because he didn't want to view the room where she had been with her lover. Joan appeared to have aged 10 years as she down the steps. The ambulance had come, and as they walked past the officer, Pete asked, "Can we have his car towed?" "I don't want it here when we return." Joan does not need to see it. Not that he was very bothered about Joan. He simply wanted it gone. The officer stated that he will take care of it in the car. They drove silently almost halfway to the hospital. Joan said, "Speak to me, Pete. Yell at me. Scream at me. Call me a 3 or 4 again. But let me know what you were thinking." He resumed driving. After another minute, he announced, "Assault." "How are you going to go about assault?" "Everyone will know it was voluntary. I will not lie for you." Joan's face fell. "I would like to use this as a chance to keep him away from me. He was getting too controlling, and I had decided to leave him and his firm anyhow. So I've heard." She stared at her husband with amazement. "Just because I'm short in height doesn't mean I'm short in brain." She whispered. "I understand," he said. "I would ask you why you did it, but I am already aware." "I'm sorry," she whispered. "The unfortunate part is that I would do virtually anything for you. You know I would. But one of the few things I can't alter is something you've been holding against me for years. You shouldn't have married me, Joan. Please do not mention that. I made a terrible mistake. We've been really well together. We have a wonderful family, a beautiful home, and nice jobs. We have a very fantastic life, except for your long-buried desire for taller, heavier males." "That was a direct hit," he added. Besides, you should have considered all of those lovely things and determined that an affair was not worth the risk. As a portfolio manager, you should understand all about risk. I understand. I was incredibly stupid. Would you kindly forgive me? Pete shook his head. Maybe someday, but not any time soon, she asked. So is there a chance that we will stay together? No, that won't happen, but why? He scoffed. Why do you believe so? She responded. Due to the affair. We can seek counseling. We can conquer this. Joan, this was not just an affair. On Friday, his small boy provided me a link to a cloud account where the sex fest you and Andrew had on Thursday and Friday had been videotaped. She let out a gasp at the revelation. I'm not sure who set it up, Andrew or Ricky. Regardless, I heard you. You don't have to worry about wearing high heels around me anymore. It had never disturbed me before. I knew. It has always bothered you. You will no longer have to be concerned that people may see your short husband as an easy target to attack. Do you still believe you made up the tale about Paris? Joan shook her head no, almost imperceptibly, but it was quite evident. Also, when Ricky forwarded me the link in his letter, he mentioned that Andrew had committed to find a method to screw you as well. No surprise he entered our backyard as if he owned it. He showed no respect for me or for us. Why should he? His father didn't either. And who was the first to show disrespect for our marriage? That would be you, Joan. She was upset when she realized she'd disrespected Pete. First, she was also shocked that Ricky thought he could have sex with her. She did not like Ricky. She now understood why he had been lingering around so much. She could not believe how far she had gone. Pete, I don't know what to say other than to keep saying how sorry I am. You may be sorry, but it is not enough. You've lost faith in me. You've lost respect for me. Even if I am a better man than him in every way. That wasn't enough for you, was it? Joan gazed out the window as tears flowed down her cheeks. She inquired, What now? I had planned to send you divorce papers today. I'll wait a little longer on those, depending on how the next few days go. We're still getting divorced, but giving you the paperwork on the day you were allegedly assaulted would undoubtedly look bad in family court. He asked, So how are you going to pull off the assault? What was with the... Do you intend to send an innocent guy to jail? I wanted to send him to the mortuary, but you were equally culpable as he is. So that comment made her want to jump off the moving vehicle. Jones claimed there was nothing innocent about him. All you have to tell the cops is that I was crying when you entered the bedroom. You saw nothing else. Once Andrew saw you, he went after you. I will take care of the rest. That way you won't have to lie. That is a falsehood, he stated. I understand, but I pleaded with him to leave. The tears would have come shortly after. Pete remarked, I have this black eye to prove he hit me, and skin from his back under my fingernails to show I tried to fight him off. And don't forget, your inner portion is full with evidence that he screwed you. Oops, I meant to assault you. Joan burst into tears after hearing the comment. Pete asked. She gathered herself and added, You still haven't told me why you got the shotgun. Crazy things can happen during fights. I was not going to let him injure you. I had no idea how long I had been out of it, so I grabbed it. I didn't know what to expect as I stepped outside. Was this what you expected to see? They both knew the answer to the question. Pete appreciated her desire to keep him safe, but she should have felt that way 3 years ago and avoided starting an affair. Pete called a few minutes later while they were still in the car. Brian, this is Pete. Joan and I are on our way to the hospital. We're both fine, but we need a good attorney, and we need him or her fast. I'll give you the details as soon as possible, possibly later today. Man, sorry to hear that. I will make a couple calls. Are you heading to Williamson's Medical Center? We are, Brian explained. Okay, good. I am delighted you are keeping it within the family. Sorry. That was my lousy attempt to lighten the mood. I'll make sure that someone meets you quickly. Don't talk to anyone until you've spoken with your attorney, Pete responded. We understand. And thank you, Brian. Pete ended the phone and gazed at his soon-to-be ex-wife. You understood that, correct? This is a risky game you were playing, and you need to clear your name before you get caught up in lies and end yourself in jail on top of the adultery. I'm sure your children and relatives would love to be able to see you in jail. Internally, Joan sighed at her plight. Perhaps she should jump out of the car after all. As Brian recounted, they were approached in the emergency room by the hospital administrator and senior legal counsel. They knew Brian personally, and the attorney was a distant relative. They were mostly there to guarantee that they were noticed right away and that no one attempted to interrogate them until they had confirmed with the attorney that Brian was Cindy. When the attorney arrived, she soon learned what Joan was trying to accomplish. They gradually documented what led up to the day, including the duration of the affair and some of the specifics. Ricky showed up and became involved. The videos from Andrew's apartment and the Clark security system. Joan was humiliated by having to explain everything in front of her husband. Pete was done being angry. He was just numb. Who was the person he'd been living with? Finally, the attorney urged Joan to pursue an out-of-court settlement that would recompense her enough to move on to another firm. She believes the DA's office would pursue a criminal prosecution due to the length of the affair, making today seem like bitter grapes, perhaps bad. But that was the most likely outcome. Furthermore, Andrew's side of the tale would establish a case, making it difficult for 12 people to convict him. So why would the DA squander the court's time, which would certainly result in a hung jury? However, Andrew would most likely prefer that his name and firm remain out of civil court, and more significantly, the news. Also, he would most likely prefer that no mention be made of the beating he received while visiting a married woman's home. At this moment, Pete requested a few minutes with Joan. He stated, "I don't care if the settlement is for $10,000 or $10 million. In the divorce papers, I intend to seek for the house. All other assets will be shared 50-50ths, with the exception of my consultancy business, and there will be no alimony. So you may want to strive to get as much as possible. Wait, I want to change it. You can keep the bed after today. That dirty creature is yours to deal with, as you wish." That reply indicated that she would be completely alone in pursuing the subject. She was certain that her spouse would leave her. She realized it was her fault, but addressing this on her own was almost unbearable. She claimed, "You'd be willing to battle me for the house." He responded, "After everything I've learned over the last few weeks, after what I've seen on video the last few days, after what I saw in her bedroom today, and after what I did to your lover a short while ago, you'd want to know what I'm willing to do. You may want to consider what I could do. Should I be so determined? Consider what I could accomplish with those movies and who I could distribute them to. Your laptop is still on our home server, so I have the contact information for all of your clients and many of the firm's others, and I could give them a wonderful video of their investment advisor not taking oaths seriously or exercising sound judgment. How many of them do you think would want to continue working together? What about you, though? Ask your sweetheart how angry I am and what I am willing to do. Trust me." He got off easily. "If the only thing I get out of the marriage you destroyed is our house, you'll have gotten off easy." Every time he spoke the word lover, it felt like a red-hot poker on her flesh. It pained her. But what could she say? She could not refute it. There were no mitigating circumstances. "I'm not willing to fight Pete over the horrible disaster she made." She agreed with him and resolved to get as much as she could from the jerk who had ruined her marriage. Following Andrew's surgeries, Joan received a compensation from him. It took many weeks to negotiate and another couple of weeks to get. But it was enough that even if it took her a few years to find job and return to her previous income, she would be able to subsist. Not long later, she found a new job. Brian and Miriam used investment advisors. It didn't pay as much as her previous position, but it was with a huge global corporation, so she has at least some prospects. She bought a condo near her new employment and set up a 3-bedroom house so that the kids could spend some time there. Hopefully, she gave away her old bedroom set. She did not want it either. She tried to put her mistakes behind her, but the evenings were the worst. She alternated between feeling numb and heartbreaking grief, multiple times. She called Pete, cried, and hung up. She didn't say anything. She'd probably need to see a psychiatrist and, ideally, get a lot of sympathy or embraces from the kids and a couple of her brothers who lived close. One of the things that helped her with her new company was that she poached some of her old clients from Andrew, which was very simple because they loved her and were ready to quit Andrew's firm after someone advised a reporter to seek information through Freedom of Information Act requests. investigating a police report involving Andrew at the home of a married woman. The officer appears to have written a pretty full account of the occurrence, including the assaulted but avenged husband, the abused victim claiming assault, and brandishing a shotgun to protect her husband's safety. The amazing story began in the newspapers and ultimately made it to the local nightly newscast. Once out of the hospital, Andrew's only response to questioning was, "It is a private matter." No comment. Andrew underwent many procedures that saved his injured kidney, fixed his rib, and restored some functionality to his testicle. There was hope that he might eventually get an erection, but he would need another surgery, which would be terrible for Pete. The past few weeks had been the longest of his life. He attempted to remain on the road as much as possible. The months that followed, including the Thanksgiving holiday, were also painful. He felt physically ill the day Joan moved away. The dissolution of their family unit was worse than when his grandparents died. Iva was at least somewhat prepared for what Ricky said. He had seeded the germ of doubt, which eventually developed into the truth. She despised what her mother did. I hated it. How could anyone harm her father in that way? Even though her father was the innocent person, she knew this would pain him for a time. Her mother would be okay. Eva assumed she would find a way to excuse her conduct. Perhaps this would make her see sense. She would look after her mother and try to forgive her. She realized it would be a long time before their relationship recovered. Eva had prepared Donnie so that he wasn't taken entirely off guard. He was angry with his mother. Being in his final semester at Georgia Tech made it much easier for him to avoid the whole situation and ignore his mother's phone calls. Despite the fact that he received the house and the divorce, the entire scenario was terrible and did not improve the kids' education. With the kids gone, Pete wondered if he should simply sell it. The three sisters jumped in to attempt to cheer him up. Subscribe to our channels to ensure your second chaff does not cheat on you. Go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story pales in comparison to the following one. 1.